Welcome to Arts, Work, Life, a video podcast from the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. I'm your host, Claire Caulfield.
And I'm Jenny Thomas, executive producer.
And this is the fourth episode of our fifth season, and it is titled Trust.
We've compiled this assortment of stories because they speak to something very critical in 2026, the need for trust. We live in fractured times, no doubt, and these fractures can run really deep in organizations and communities, but it's so important to remember that the arts can restore trust, and it's equally important for we arts workers and collaborators to trust one another.
Absolutely. And a through line that I've seen in so many stories that we've had on this show, on this subject over the years, is that accountability is really key for rebuilding trust. And some of the stories today touch on that. We also have some just really beautiful stories about how trust can take root in creative collaborations and the amazing things that blossom because of that. And we're starting today with one of the most fundamental relationships in life, the relationship with your family. Juanita Anderson grew up in theater, literally. Her mother is an actress and producer, and when Juanita was 12 years old, the family purchased a historic theater. It serves Miami's large Spanish-speaking population, with shows in both English and Spanish. Juanita was always so proud to contribute to the legacy of Cuban, Nicaraguan, Venezuelan, and Colombian Americans that makes her hometown unique. And over the years, she worked just about every behind-the-scenes job in the theater, from usher to box office manager. Before she graduated high school, Juanita knew this business inside and out. Juanita's story is about how she balances innovation and tradition. So here's Juanita.
When I was 18 years old and I graduated from high school, I decided to take the next step, going to school for business. Now I wasn't just understanding the production side of things. Back then, we're talking about over maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago, everything was done in cash because we didn't trust credit cards. So that was a big trust that the community had to give us. It's a big trust for them to trust a system that they have never heard of, charging them a facility fee. They didn't understand, so they always wanted to pay cash. And then I said, why? If we want them to use credit card, if they use a credit card and they start learning to trust the system, then they will be able to purchase the tickets in advance. And if they can purchase the tickets in advance, we understand exactly how many people will be attending. We can prepare our bar, our cafeteria. We can make sure we have the right amount of personnel for the day, ushers, something we weren't able to calculate back in the day. So removing those interruptions, those features made the whole process smooth. And when you're young, when you're about 20 years old, 22, you want to change everything now. Everything had to be changed yesterday. But I also didn't understand that every single change had a consequence. Every decision I made had 30 more that came along. Being a generational business, one of the things that I was crashing with my mother often was the seasonal performances. When my mother acquired these venues, one of the things that she wanted was to keep open season. Juice out the play as much as it can, and when it can't no more, then we bring something new. They didn't want a single person that would say, oh, I really want to go see that play, not give them the opportunity. No, they had the opportunity to come and watch. At first, it was wonderful. It gave us a name in this city. But after a while, I started seeing a problem with it.
Whenever a play's attendance started dropping, that's when her parents would begin the process of finding the next show. To Juanita, this felt really inefficient, because it could take weeks to get the new production ready for opening night. She suggested a more traditional format of having a set season with strict starting and ending dates for each production.
It took some convincing, but her parents agreed to try out her plan. The first show they staged was a runaway success, and no one in the family wanted to end its run. But Juanita already had the next 2 shows lined up. And those following 2 shows were not a success.
Numbers went from sold out to 30% of the venue was selling. And then it was chaos. And then chaos. And it did not work. It didn't work for producers. It didn't work for our audience. It didn't work for our community. It didn't work for anyone. It only worked for me. It only worked for me and my calendar and my theory in my head. Why? It's an entire case study why. I was not listening to our community. I was not understanding our audience. I did not understand that, because I mentioned that the Hispanic community takes a little bit longer to get into the American rhythm. I wanted it to go fast. I wanted to do it now. And that's not realistic. It wasn't real. I don't think the problem is the play. I think the problem is me and my calendar and my military style. So I said, okay, there's something going on with this tradition because it works, maybe not the way that I want it to work, and maybe it doesn't work how it has always worked, but I do need to understand why it was created this way, how we make it happen, and why. Understand, why do we do this? And that's how we have been able to come up with this new scheme, which is a mix of the traditional, it's mainly tradition if I had to say, it's 60-40. Mainly tradition. Is the play going to do well? If so, we will extend it 2 weeks. And if it's not going well, we can decrease it 2 weeks, and then we have an entire month where we can bring a comedian. We can do something creative with those dates. We can bring the community to and have a live band for those days. And that has given me time and space to not have that feeling that I had the first 3 seasons of me battling the producers wanting more dates and me telling them no, fighting with my family, saying we don't do it this way. This is not us. This is not our community. This is not our people. We don't do this. And my heart had saying, we have to try it. Thankfully, they do trust. They do trust me. They do trust the process. And they give me the space to try. I have been able to implement many ideas that I've had. I want to say most of them have been successful. And some of them that weren't successful, we're not ready yet, or we don't have the infrastructure yet, or it requires much more organizations than what we can handle right now. Thankfully, my mother, she's come to an age where she says, you know what, in the next 5 years, I want to retire. I have been doing it for the past 15 years, but now it's time for the next generation, not just a generation of business owners, but also as spectators. The spectators that we used to have 15 years ago are extremely elderly now. How are we going to cultivate the Hispanic community in these changing times? And that is my future in this role, in this business, is to become what my mother is right now, which is the artistic director, while still listening to the community. If there's one thing I can give advice to anyone, doesn't have to be a multi-generational company, is give the people under you that want to have your role, give them the opportunity to try and succeed, or to try and fail. But at least they tried and they know what works, what doesn't. And sometimes what happened to me, failing taught me more. It taught me to listen to my community.
My takeaway from Juanita's story is that it really speaks to both the intergenerational discourse, but also like the intercultural discourse going on right now. Jenny, what are some of your takeaways?
Yeah, definitely. My takeaway is that no matter what the difference in perspectives, really listening and hearing what the concerns are of others and not dismissing them is key to making things work. I mean, Juanita and her parents had to learn to trust each other, and Juanita had to learn to listen to the community. And it just reminds us how the arts is a really important place to work out differences. You know, we hear about the trust in telling stories, honoring the history, and listening to each other, even if we disagree.
Absolutely, which brings us to our next multi-layered story. For many years, Perla Batalla was Leonard Cohen's backup singer, collaborator, and close friend. Since his death in 2016, Perla and her band have been performing Leonard's songs all over the world. Perla and her band were preparing for a monumental recording session in 2019, but what happened next forced her to reevaluate who she could trust. Here's Perla.
Just after having completed a tour in Europe with my band of Spanish musicians, I started working on this album of Leonard Cohen songs, and I was very excited about it. COVID hits, and then I lost my mother to COVID, lost my dear friend to COVID, one right after the other. And so I went into a further state of absolute despair and grief and didn't think much about my recording until finally I thought, I have to do something. I can't just sit here and grieve. So I went back to my guys and I said, send me the files. Well, I got the most upsetting message from my producer who said, I lost all of the files. I was in a state of shock. It was a numb kind of feeling where you just say that you can't say anything. I lost all of my work, had very little money, and I just thought, there's no way I can start over. I'll just have to try getting back on the road, touring, maybe save up a little money. But anyone that really knows about touring, you don't make much money on the road. You spend as much as you make. It's a very difficult way to make a living. So anyway, my husband came up with the idea that maybe we should try a GoFundMe, raise some money that way. And I was horrified. Asking for money, it just is such a very difficult thing for me to do. There's a lot of shame involved with losing a project. I don't know how many people can say that and admit it and, not feel like it's my fault. Because as a producer, everything is my fault. So after getting, over that, I just told the truth. I told my story and I did a GoFundMe, which is, so difficult to do, but turns out it was the easiest part of this whole process. It literally took me 5 days to raise that money. And it was a fraction of what it takes to make a record. But still, I got what I asked for and more than that. I was stunned. And I came back to Spain to record with my Barcelona musicians. And after COVID, nothing was the same. And how naive of me to think that anything would be the same. People had so profoundly changed and been through so much. And that hadn't occurred to me, honestly, until we were in the sessions and rehearsing, and my wonderful musical director, who was a recovering alcoholic, had returned to drinking, and that became a very difficult thing to face. I found myself triggered by his behavior and traumatized, actually, by it. That's how it goes. Everybody knows. Well, I was raised by an alcoholic. My father was just a horrible, horrible alcoholic, and we dealt with issues with his alcoholism from the time I was a little girl. It was always something, and he was violent. He died because he got in a car accident, absolutely drunk, and crashed head-on into someone else. Luckily, they survived, but he didn't make it, so he made life very horrible for us. It was a nightmare. It was heartbreaking to realize that my dear friend, and he is a dear, dear friend and musical director, had gone back to drinking, out of control kind of drinking. He is preventing us from moving on with the project. And one day he just walked into the studio and I knew he was in really bad shape, lost a lot of weight, and smelled of alcohol. He would sneak off and drink during breaks. But anyone that reeks that much is pretty much drinking night and day. What's amazing about this particular human being is that even trashed, he plays better than most people. So I had to put my feelings on hold about it. But I can't put emotion in my voice on hold. That just comes out. Whatever it is, comes out. And I also had this thought that what I do as an artist is capture the moment. And this is the moment. Whether he's sober and sharp as a tack, whether he's falling apart like everybody else in the world. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. It's honest. It's honest and it's true. And that's what we're here to do as artists. The only reason I'm here is to tell the truth. As an artist, as a person, I want to record that way too. So maybe this could be the most honest recording that I've ever done in my life.
Now the courtroom is quiet, but who will confess? Is it true?
That song for me is called A Singer Must Die. And it's about a singer must die for the lie in his voice, which is absolutely the truth. I mean, I feel like I really can tell when a singer is so-called just phoning it in, you know, where it might be a beautiful song, it might be an incredible voice, but if there's nothing making me feel something, it doesn't do a thing for me. Now it's actually one of my favorite tracks on the record. So my musical director, who has been struggling so much with his alcoholism, is now in a program, and he is staying sober, and we, you know, all constantly tell each other that we love each other. I tell him my fears. Can we work together? Is this going to be okay? And if it's not okay, I'm going to have to find somebody else. And that won't be easy. It'll be very painful for all of us. But right now, we're just going to take it one day at a time. We're about to release this album that we've just finished. It's called A Letter to Leo. We're getting ready to set up a tour starting in Europe, and then we're going to continue it in the US. Today I have this amazing project which I'm so proud of and grateful for because I let it happen. I opened the doors to my heart and my soul, and I said, come at me, let's do this. Let's do this. And it's not easy, it's never easy, but we do it.
I love that story. I mean, not just because of the great music, but also just that the great journey of learning to trust again after being let down and disappointed. This is another story that I've carried with me ever since talking with her.
Absolutely. And you think of the nightmare of these things, one after another, losing
Relentless.
her mother and her friend to COVID, and then the producer losing all the files and raising money to get back on track, and then having her music director start drinking again. It's really painful, and you feel it in her voice. And this story, it reminds me that when you're collaborating with people, how much you have to trust and what it must feel like when that trust is broken. Mm-hmm. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's somber, but it's uplifting in that you feel like she finds trust in herself, truth in in herself. She knows she has to be, she talks about it being the most honest recording she's ever done in her life.
Right.
And, references that Leonard Cohen song, singer must die for the lie in his voice. She can't be untruthful herself.
Mm-hmm.
So she does learn to trust in herself. And so it leaves us
in a good place.
hopeful.
She finds her artistic voice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so now let's talk about the importance of trusting your team and the institution where you spend so many hours of your life, which brings us to our next storyteller from season 1, Rachel Fine. In her story, Rachel shares an important message for other people in the C-suite about what it really means to be a team player. But she starts her story almost 2 decades ago, before she held any kind of leadership position. At the time, she was working at an arts organization and getting great feedback from her boss and felt supported by her entire team, which was why she was so excited to announce that she was pregnant. But that excitement was not reciprocated. Here's Rachel.
Well, one thing I will never forget is my immediate boss saying very directly, "I thought we were a team." That still resonates to this day, especially because she had been so encouraging and supportive leading up to that moment. So that was indication to me that things were going to go downhill, and they did. I ended up getting, for the first time in my life, a very negative review. I do remember the review questioning whether or not I was going to be able to be a good leader. That's what really stands out. It took a long time, I have to say, to come to that moment of saying, I'm not going to let this define me. So here I was, truly at the lowest point imaginable. And I think at this point I was probably in the last few months of my first pregnancy, which is hard. Our development chair at the time got wind of what, in retrospect, was very likely, discrimination at a time when I was pregnant. And this savior, this angel, who was our development chair, he slipped my name to this other executive director, Rob Berman. And the phone rang, and it was Rob Berman, the executive director, and he said, the development chair really thinks we should meet. And I said, well, I'm 9 months pregnant. And I mean, it didn't faze him. He said, let's meet, let's just have coffee. And we did hit it off. And I think immediately developed mutual admiration for one another and mutual respect. And he said, okay, well, go have your baby and I'll be in touch. So I resigned from the post I was in and I joined him a few months later. He gave me the time that I needed to be on maternity leave, and then he allowed me to work part-time. And I will never forget that. I will forever be indebted to him. He was my role model in terms of how to treat my employees. Now that I've been an executive director several times, I completely understand that losing a key staff member, it can be harrowing. It can be really, really daunting. My very first executive director job, I had an employee whose father was dying, and the father lived with her. And she really was just completely incapacitated by this, understandably. So not just the grief, but she was caring for him and trying to make sure that he was comfortable in his last weeks of life. And what it meant is that I had to do her job and mine. And that's what I did. And I'm not saying it was easy. I remember many nights staying up till midnight, but I will never forget the thank you note that she wrote me after she came up for air. I still have that thank you note. And that's what you do. That is what you do. If this pandemic has taught us anything, is how to be flexible, how to come up with all different kinds of solutions. if you are a good or a great leader, or you're aspiring to be a great leader, you have to rely on your creativity and your resourcefulness, as well as your optimism to find a solution. I have to say, when I was executive director of the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra, in 4.5 years, I might have missed 2 performances, and I was out late at night a lot. You know, I love being at performances, but I also had a second child at that point, and I was just killing myself to get to everything. It really took a toll. It took a major, major toll. So I just think we have to look at what our expectations have been in the past, and we need to delegate more. So, last night is a perfect example. I was just traveling for work, and I was really exhausted coming back. I was supposed to present at a city council meeting our new season. But I thought, well, what a way to empower my staff members. They did the presentation. They did a great job. And for me and my balance and mental health, it was the thing I needed to do, and no one died. I wouldn't have done that, I have to say. I wouldn't have done that 7 or 8 years ago. And I think that's so important, because I have worked at arts organizations where everyone had to be there every minute at every performance, and I think that it's not a realistic standard. By virtue of being the performing arts field, there are always going to be performances at night. So how do you make this possible? We have to divide and conquer and be reasonable and allow people. And I don't think our employees are going to let us not. I think they're going to demand a greater work-life balance. I see that happening right and left, and especially the employees who are a generation younger than I am. That's going to make a huge difference in terms of not just attracting, but keeping working mothers in our workplace. And it's not just women. I mean, it's anyone who wants to be able to do both. And I just don't ever want someone who wants children, but also wants to be in this field, to feel that they have to compromise.
So Jenny, as a fellow arts administrator, what messages really resonate for you in Rachel's story?
Well, it's when her boss says, "I thought we were a team." I mean, my stomach just sinks.
Right to the heart.
And she realizes in that moment that the trust has been broken. It's so, so important. Trust in the workplace goes both ways, and leadership needs to trust the team, and the team needs to also be able to trust in leadership. So, you hear that in how she goes forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And we recently received an update from Rachel. Since we heard from her in season 1, she moved her and her family across the country and is now the executive director at the Yale Schwartzman Center at Yale University. So here is Rachel in 2026.
You have to be very assertive, thoughtful, methodical, and intentional about building trust. And it's a constant process, and it's a constant process for all sorts of reasons. Even if you have the same team members for years on end, you have to keep working on it. It's no different than, a marriage, and those things change over time. The environment around you might be changing. Like right now, I can't tell you, since I've been in this job, both our, political climate, what's happening globally, but what's also happening in higher education. So trust is foremost, trust is paramount, and our team that we've built, and this team has grown a lot over 4 years because we were a startup back in 2022. We've more than doubled. We really, I would say collectively, pay a lot of attention to it and take a lot of steps, annually to make sure that we are attentive to, not just workplace culture, but actually building trust, understanding, compassion, empathy, all of those things that I think help build a healthy workplace.
And another happy note is that the baby from her story has just graduated from college.
Oh, I love that. Congrats.
Yeah.
Which brings us to our next story, which is actually one of my favorites from the past 4 seasons.
Yeah, me too.
And it's one of the stories we've received the most feedback from.
Yeah, it's completely groundbreaking.
It is. And so I'm usually pretty strict about only having one storyteller per story. And I do feel really bad about this because obviously so much of art is collaboration, but focusing on one person's journey, I mean, that's just the format of our show, right? Except for this one. Because when Alex Ketley submitted a story for consideration, he was really submitting on behalf of himself and Bill Clark, who is an inmate on death row. When I had my initial call with Alex, I realized that this story just had to be the exception to my rule, because the relationship between Alex and Bill, that is the story. And I want to take a moment to thank staff members of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation who helped make this recording possible. So now, on to the story. Alex Ketley is a performance artist, choreographer, and educator. When the pandemic started, he was teaching a dance class at a university in California, and the lockdown put him in a predicament. How would he make a dance film when his students were spread out all over the world? Even more importantly, how could his class stay connected in a time of such intense isolation? Alex decided to turn to someone who knows more about isolation than just about anyone else. Bill Clark, who was an inmate on death row. Here's Bill and Alex sharing their story of collaboration, friendship, and how one relationship can touch hundreds of lives.
I've been incarcerated for 34 years on death row. What, about 5 or 6 years ago, I met Alex through a pen pal website called writerprisoner.com. And because he lived so close to San Quentin, which is where I was housed at the time, he came to visit me. And one thing led to another, and we decided to create a collaborative piece.
I met Bill with no design or intention on becoming artistic collaborators. I was concerned about inmates during the height of the pandemic. And so I wrote Bill this letter. We became close friends. But the more I got to know Bill, it was clear that he was this very, very vibrant artistic spirit. The school had asked me to make a dance film with the students scattered all across the planet. This sort of interesting process that was this remote process. So I had separation from Bill. I had separation from all the performers because everybody was in quarantine. I had performers who were in Japan and China and the Middle East. And, we were working entirely by Zoom, where I would teach them movements and then they would go out somewhere and film that movement.
So when I actually saw it, I was in shock, but in a good way.
I think there's something around when Bill is in a class, the students realize how consequential this interaction is. Bill, through his openness, really, I think, sets an example for a class of how to be in an artistic setting, that we're going to be open and vulnerable. And the fact that he's going out of his way to reach out from death row to work with students and mentor them and talk to them, I think just sets up a different type of environment and interaction. And the artwork feels like it just has to be deeper and more resonant because of that.
I teared up because of the authenticity of each person involved and the passion. When I was their age, I was nowhere near that open and honest about my personal life. In a classroom setting like that, I would have never done that. It just motivated me to be more open, more vulnerable, and more authentic with them. One day, Alex came to me and he said he wanted to produce a show, which is basically a portrait of my life. And I was so incredibly moved by it.
I remember talking to Bill and I said, all these things that we've been working on are so important to me and kind of has changed me so dramatically. But I said, the thing that I really do is I love working on these evening length performance pieces. So it's not a piece about prison and it's not a piece about freedom. It's really a reflection of me and Bill's deep friendship. And then the title, An Approximation of Resilience. Your listeners have never met anybody more resilient or more optimistic than Bill Clark. And so for me, making the work was really I just felt like what I needed to do is amplify Bill's genius in the hopes that it changes people's perspectives on inmates generally, but also creates kind of momentum around people wanting to free Bill. Because in the end, that's the big part of this story. Your listeners might question, is Bill guilty or is he not guilty? We also have to question another thing is, should we incarcerate people for 40 to 50 to 60 to 70? I don't think as a society we should do that.
Not being able to attend the rehearsals was probably the lowest point for me. I mean, I wanted to be there, and I actually would have loved to have danced myself. Even though I'm not a dancer, obviously, I'm not a professional dancer, but I think it would have been riveting for people to see me dance. And the fact that I couldn't dance, I couldn't be a part of the show itself, and I couldn't be there while the piece was being created during the rehearsal process. Because every now and then I would call in on the video on the tablet and watch the rehearsal, which was great, but I would have loved to have been at every single rehearsal. Working with Alex has been probably the greatest turning point of my life. It has changed my life. He has single-handedly changed my life. You're sitting in a prison cell and you're on death row. In your wildest dreams, you never imagined a show in New York that's based on your life and your story. So that was an extremely high point.
Having a deep friendship with somebody that absolutely changes your life almost in every way, then of course interlaces with my life as an art maker. I mean, on a practical level, I've been to a prison almost every week for 5 years. Bill has always been a deep inspiration to me, how he has absolutely transcended his experience. He talks about often, the state has incarcerated his body, but his spirit is free and always will be free. And that kind of vantage point is really incredibly life-changing to think about in our own lives.
Because of Alex and our collaborative work, I don't dwell on a lot of the negativity of prison life and the mundane aspects of it. He basically and virtually eliminated all of that from my life because of his presence. When you're 71 years old and incarcerated, there's not a lot of incentive to rise, I'll say, because I'm surrounded by a lot of guys. They don't have the support system I have, and they don't have the incentive that I have to get up every morning. And I cannot thank him enough.
Everything that Bill has gotten, I have gotten just equally. Bill has become a surrogate parent when I don't have parents, a grandparent to my daughter. It's funny because we've had quite a serious interview, and Bill and I joke around a lot. So I was about to just say something funny.
Say something funny. And I'm tearing up too, look, because of you. And I love him for that. Yeah.
Bill was talking to some of our allies in the prison system, and they basically said, do you think Alex would ever come teach a class here? And I said, oh my God, absolutely. That would be absolutely fantastic.
I'm excited about it. I can't wait. I'm anxious. Some of the inmates that I've spoken to already are excited about it. They can't wait. They know they'll be creating performance pieces and they all look forward to it. I think in this iteration of the class, I think it shouldn't be about me at all. It should be more about the inmates sharing their stories, because we all have a story. And I think the goal should be to highlight their stories and their experiences and not so much focus on me and mine.
Having an opportunity to work intimately with inmates to get their stories and their voices and their ideas out in the world is really compelling to me. With this, I'm hoping I can bring new kind of ideas and concepts that the inmates might not have had exposure to, from contemporary artwork. And the way that we're envisioning the class is that it's not really just a class in creating dance or choreography. They can make films, they can write plays, they can it's really open to any medium that you're drawn to.
This fall, roughly 800 inmates at Vacaville Prison will have the opportunity to enroll in Alex and Bill's course, which has Bill reflecting back on their very first collaboration.
When Alex first told me that he and I were going to teach a class, I don't think I've ever told him this. I thought he had lost his mind. I said to myself, this guy, though I love him, is delusional. So when he sent me the email from the department chairman approving it and actually saying, I can't wait to come to some of the classes, I was so shocked. I had to look at it and read it like 50 times. And I'm like, this can't be true. This can't be real. And I don't think in the history of the world has a death row inmate ever taught a class at any university. I still can't believe that happened. I've maintained friendships with a lot of the students that I've co-taught. A lot of them are still in my life. They come to visit me. They share their life experiences with me, their struggles, their triumphs. I get all of that. I try my best to be an empathetic listener. I don't judge. I don't criticize. I just listen. And so with the class that Alex and I will be ultimately teaching here at Vacaville, I know a lot of the inmates struggle with emotional, psychological, and social problems and social issues. I'll try my best to assist them in getting through those experiences and overcoming those experiences to live better lives and be better people. And it all seems very dreamlike to me, to bring generosity and share generosity and compassion with a new generation of people is an absolute dream of mine. It's a dream come true for me.
So Jenny, what has resonated with you most about this story since we first heard it last year?
I think it's the trust that Alex and Bill had to build over time and distance, and the trust that Bill really had to have in Alex to tell his story. I feel like Bill also finds trust in himself. He says, when he was younger, he wasn't as open and honest, but he found trust in himself. And for that reason, even though he's in prison, he's found freedom through his artwork. So there's really no story that speaks to trust more than this one, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank all 84 of our storytellers for having trust in me to produce their stories. It's a very vulnerable thing to talk to someone, a complete stranger, for a few hours and then trust that they'll edit your story down to, 5 minutes. That really captures your journey. So thank you.
Don't you have like a policy or something?
Yes. Okay. So it's the no surprises policy. It comes from my background in journalism. I require that the storytellers speak to me over multiple days, so they have time to think about their story, sleep on it, and decide that they actually want. Oh, and so if they decide that they actually don't want to reveal a certain detail to the world, we have time to pivot and find a new story. So no surprises.
No surprises.
Yeah, and no surprise that we are out of time today, but next time on Arts Work Life, a look at the many different roles advocacy can play in the performing arts industry. Arts Work Life is a production from APAP, the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the storytellers and not necessarily those of APAP. APAP is the national service organization for the performing arts presenting, booking, and touring industry. You can join APAP at apap365.org. I'm Claire Caulfield, your host and producer. Jenny Thomas is our amazing executive producer, and we always want to give a thank you to Grace Asuncion. Music today was provided by Blue Dot Sessions and Perla Batalla. This podcast wouldn't be possible without the generous support of the Wallace Foundation, so thank you. Other thank yous to the APAP staff and board of directors, our storytellers today, and the hundreds of thousands of arts workers across the world. Your stories matter, and arts workers are essential. If you like this episode, send it to someone who you trust.
Arts, work, life. That's real.